and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's session with Lorna Green. Lorna is speaking to us from the high desert of New Mexico, and so obviously she's in a different time zone, and I'm just admitting people at the same time. And she, as you will see from her biography, has got a long involvement in consciousness studies, both from the point of view of philosophy, psychology, and indigenous wisdom. And her life has taken her through periods of retreat, being in nature, and as you may have read, a 14-year wilderness life of prayer, writing, and practical tasks in terms of working all this out. And I know that we have this afternoon with us a lot of people who have researched deeply these areas themselves. And I think we're all on the same page of knowing how important an adequate view of consciousness is, not just within science and consciousness studies, but also more generally. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about this afternoon, is what this means, what our worldview means for how we treat ourselves, each other, and how we treat the earth. So what's going to happen is that Lorna's going to speak to us for the first half of the call, and then we'll hope to have a very fruitful discussion and really think together this afternoon and see if we can advance our understanding. So Lorna, over to you.
David?
Yes, you just switch your camera back on.
Is the camera on now?
No.
Paul, the camera has to go back on. Somehow
it was on before.
Somehow the camera has suddenly turned off.
We've got technical assistance just arriving here. That's it.
Don't go too far away.
It's gone completely white. You'll need to. I think it's stabilizing now. Right, good. Okay. Over to you, Lorna.
Don't go too far. Hi, everyone. David, I remember that you asked me to give people hope. So let me tell you some of my reasons for hope. First of all, I live in the high desert country of northern New Mexico. I walk out my back door into a small grove of truly ancient trees, the enormous trees that uphold and maintain the entire biosphere. That is something the Native people know. And beyond them, meadows, hills, mountains, the enormous space, the times, the silence, and the light. And my idea of a good time is to have a 9-hour day ahead of me, completely unstructured, where I can meander at will and pester spirit for ideas, and they come. Now, reasons for hope. I think the good news has never been greater than it is right now. And I begin with the election of Joe Biden. With Biden, something totally new is happening in history because Biden is in the love orientation. Obama was in the love orientation, but he was blocked. Biden is in the love orientation, as are the people around him, and he knows what has to happen, and he is not blocked. So that is the first piece of good news that I want to tell you. And then where do I go from here? I'll tell you briefly of my life. I'm a Canadian. I grew up in Canada. Canadians have a tremendous bond with the wilderness, and the northern frontier is also a part of the Canadian imagination. I grew up knowing all the stories of the early explorers of the country. I had a green canoe all my teenage years on the river, the Ottawa River, very close to my home. I always identified with the native people and the rollicking French voyageurs and coureurs de bois who went into the country's heartland. And we all grew up with a sense of high adventure, and we wanted a life of high adventure. And I kept connect with my friends, and I certainly had one that I'll tell you about at some point. I was born just before the war. My parents are English. My father is a physicist, and he got his PhD from, I guess it's called Royal Imperial College of London. And he came out to take charge of the wind tunnel in Ottawa. I grew up in Ottawa. Many various habitats, natural world all around us, swamps, rivers, lakes, forests, an experimental farm. And I can tell you, physicists can answer the kinds of questions that children ask. And I grew up with a very strong sense of both science and the natural world. It's allergy season out here. You have to put up with me. Our parents, I have a sister, Janet. I have a sister, Janet, who is now a nature photographer in Canada. And our parents gave us a fabulous earth connection, starting from an early age. Whenever we went for a drive and stopped the car, my sister and I would pile out and look for things in the field. I can give you two very clear memories of my childhood, which kind of summarize the gift of both parents. The first is my father. I'm standing with him at a great big rock at Norway Bay, where the Ottawa River is 3 miles wide. Now that's a river. I'm standing with him and he's explaining to me, there is the stars, a starry night. And he's explaining to me how the Milky Way isn't clouds, it's masses and masses of stars. And then how the galaxy, what a galaxy is, and that we're living in a saucer-shaped galaxy and we're looking through the edge. And then my mother, my image of my mother is, I'm a very young child, and Janet and I are sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by bowls of tadpoles and caddisflies. Mother's doing the laundry in a great big old rotary washer. Under the cupboard, in the cupboard under the phone, is our cat Charcoal with a batch of kittens. And hopping in and out is a great big Belgian hare. We have a very little wild, the garden is just unkempt weeds and grasses and things. When I told my life story to a woman friend, she said, "What? Your mother let you have a Belgian hare hopping in and out?" And our parents let us have animals of all kinds. Whenever mother went on a shopping expedition, she took us with her. And after we had been what she called lugging around freedom, we would go to the market, the Ottawa market, which was right behind, and we would look into all the boxes. There were boxes of ducklings, of chicks, of guinea pigs, hamsters, And we always came home with something. And our mother told us at an early age, you can have whatever you want, but you have to look after it yourself. And so I grew up very steeped in the magic and the mystery of the out of doors. We were always on the trail of butterflies and caterpillars. It was an amazing childhood. My father was a physicist. I was fascinated by life, and I raised animals as a teenager. And the neighborhood children knew that we were interested in animals. So when they found little wounded birds, they would bring them to us. And I remember holding a little wounded, warm bird in my hand. And then very gradually, it went stiff and cold and stopped breathing. And I pondered, I'm wondering, where does it go? What is happening? And Einstein has always been one of my beacons of light. And Einstein's fascination was light. Mine was life. And so when I went through high school, knowing that I was going to study life, biology, when I grew up, because that was the science of life. And so I followed my questions about the nature of life into studies at McGill, and later at Rockefeller. Now, I have to tell you, in my second year, the connection with the term consciousness came my way right off the bat when I was at McGill. I found a place to study in the old section of the library where the East Indian philosophers were stored. And so whenever I tired of biochemistry, I would browse in the books of these thinkers, and they all talked about consciousness, and consciousness is the true basis of the universe, and all of that sort of thing. And they gave certain exercises you could try to show you that consciousness was something real. I didn't think about it much, but I tucked it away in the back of my mind somewhere. Okay, so I was in Rockefeller in New York from 1960 to 1965. Now that was a heady time to be in New York. It was the civil rights movement, the Kennedy assassination, the tremendous advancement of science. The code is cracked, and neuroscience was just getting off the ground. I wanted to be at Rockefeller because it was pure science, and I wanted to immerse myself in science. And the same month I came, so did one of those wonderful German Jewish thinkers from Hitler's Germany. And he came the same month I did, and he had come to be philosopher in residence. And so I went up to him and presented myself and said I told him I have no interest in philosophy whatsoever, but I would like to know what the great philosophers had to say about science. And so we started together reading various texts, beginning with Plato's Phaedo. And in retrospect, it's a very wonderful gospel, because in it, Socrates tells of his youthful studies with the great natural scientist of his day, Anaxagoras, who had written, "Mind arranges all things." And so Socrates thought, well, mind would arrange all things for the best. And then he talked about, in no time, he found this philosopher totally abandoning mind and talking about, well, you're sitting there where you are because the muscles are connected to bones and they're connected to the brain and all of this, the typical explanation of physiology in our day. And so at that point, he had to find another way and take some other approach to truth. And he said at some point, by heaven, my legs would have been to Megara by now if I did not think it more right and fitting to stay in prison and endure my punishment. So long story short, I had the faith of all the scientists of my generation that all the answers we wanted lay down in the molecular level of things. That's where I headed. And every new mechanism I learned, I felt such magic and wonderful. And then gradually joy began to leave. And my classmates were satisfied with the kind of molecular description of things that were happening, but I wasn't. I felt, first of all, here I was in an undifferentiated field of molecules, and I had no better understanding of the cat that I had ever had, and somehow on the way down, I had lost the cat. And so I took to notebooks to try to figure out, well, why am I not satisfied with these answers? And I gradually came to the understanding that all of the basic principles of science rested on something that was not itself explanatory. The forces, what are the forces? I was with my physics professor. I had grown up arguing everything with my father and sharing in the worldview of science. And we were always discussing whether science could really explain the universe or not. And at some point, I realized that all of the explanations of modern science rested on something that couldn't be explained. And I remember I grew up arguing with my father, quite consciously looking for the way through, looking for the cracks and the chinks in the patriarchal armor. And I was with my physics professor one day, and I was looking at the blackboard, and he had just written Newton's laws of motion, F equals ma, on the blackboard. And I looked and I thought, oh my God, there it is. That's the way through. So I said to him, well, what exactly are the forces? And he looked at me, incredulous, and said, either you're very brilliant or very stupid. Somehow, news of this scientific heresy got back to my thesis advisor, who was Paul Weiss, and he came striding into my office one day, into the laboratory, and said, pushes and pulls. That's what the forces are all about, pushes and pulls. And I didn't say anything, but I knew to myself, I have them. What pushes, what pulls, and how do they do it? So long story short, when at that point, I felt that science did not explain the universe. And now I knew that I wanted to forget about science and embark seriously on the study of philosophy with Dr. Edelstein. His name was Dr. Edelstein. And he said to me, if you cannot establish the truth in some small matter in your laboratory, what will you get up there? And he pointed upward. So I stayed and finished my thesis. And after several years, he died just before I could begin my studies with him. And so several years went by, not quite knowing where I was meant to be or should be, but I had heard the term metaphysics from him. It came my way when I was 21. The minute I heard that word, I knew that's who I am, and that's what I'm going to be, and that's what I'm going to do. I had no idea what metaphysics was about, but I thought it the most beautiful word that I had ever heard. And so neuroscience was just getting off the ground when I was at Rockefeller, but I could already see the hard problem. Those were days of the folk songs and the Vietnam protests. And I had a particular folk song about Bill Grogan's goat who ate 3 red shirts off the line. And so Bill tied him to the railway track, and he was in the path of the oncoming train, and the goat coughed up the shirts and flagged down the train. So that was a very vivid image in my mind. And I said, how do molecules and atoms account for an image like that? And then I realized at the same time, if the patient that the physiologist is probing with his electrodes didn't say anything about what she was seeing in her inner world, he would never have suspected it. And that's how we are with all the rest of nature. And in those days, we all had the same conviction, and you know the story, the material view of things. Evolution is how it all comes into being. Consciousness appears at the end of evolution in ourselves and a few of the higher animals. And you know how this is developed. And so the great question of neuroscience was, of course, how do the neurons produce consciousness? I knew those issues. Long and short of it, I studied philosophy at the University of Toronto. I end up teaching the great books in St. John's College in the desert down in Santa Fe in the early 1970s. And by the time I was 40, I spent time in a prayer community. And by the age I was 40, I had picked up most of the learning of this age. And I went away into a wilderness life to sort the whole thing out for myself. What I love most came from my studies in physiology, making sense out of a mountain of data. And that's how I looked at the modern world, a mountain of data to be made sense of. Now, there were three crucial moments. Can you still see me, David?
Yeah.
There were three, I call them the great knocks. First of all, at the Rockefeller lunch table one day, I suddenly realized, and I said it aloud, if the stars are just lumps of burning matter, there's no point in getting excited about them. And somebody said to me, oh, you need a holiday. But I was right. I'd begun to glimpse the meaning of materialism, that kind of materialism that's crushing the joy out of life. And the second great knock, I was sitting on the steps of my wilderness life. I used to get up, make a cup of coffee, and then go sit on the steps facing the hills opposite and the forest. And I was pondering things, and I saw heaven above and the earth below. And all of a sudden, heaven came down to earth. And that was another major move. And the third one, and this is key, by the time I was 40 and went away to sort the thing out for myself, I had read works that convinced me that consciousness was the basis of the universe and the right fundamental term. But my background was in philosophy and science. I knew the language of ideas. I knew the explanatory principles of science. I couldn't see any way whatsoever to connect that understanding with my own background. And then I remember it was a very clear memory. It was a hot summer afternoon in Toronto. Somebody had put into my hands Grayson and Flynn's enormous book, simply called The Near-Death Experience. It's a long list of descriptions of over and over the same event being described in various different cases. And my friend Timmy was playing the piano, and I was browsing through Grayson and Flynn, going through the pages, and suddenly I saw a description that the patient was able to recount readings on dials they could not have seen from the bed. And at that moment, I saw that is the key. Some non-physical experience is being anchored into physical experience in all the best evidence that science has, like reading dials. Well, you know the experiment. They can read dials they couldn't have seen from the bed. Many patients report being able to even see events in the other other event in the room, other rooms in the corridor. And there's one very remarkable one where the story goes, a patient was in one of these experiences and then revived in the bed. And the doctor was fumbling for his pen, and the patient said, "Are you looking for your favorite pen? It rolled under the radiator." And so the doctor looked, and there it was. These are the kind of events I realized that tied the non-physical and the physical together. And I tucked it in the back of my mind and to think about it. And I just knew that's the key. That is the key to a whole new view of the universe. And so over the years, when duties to parents and friends kept me anchored in the 3D world, I wrote the term consciousness on a piece of paper and put it in the middle of the floor wherever I was to remind myself that that's what I'm really about. And we can talk about the near-death experience later. So that's, where I really, those were the really formative experiences. I had taken the wilderness life up at about the age of 40. And when I was about 48, when Dr. Edelstein had told me his understanding came together, I had a pretty good idea of this new view of the universe based on consciousness. And I returned to civilization to find out, quote, where civilization is at, and finding it in the hands of economists and advertising. I wrote my first book it was my first pass at metaphysics, a metaphysics based on spirit, a metaphysics based on consciousness and not matter. And that is where I lay out my first pass at redefining 4 great aspects of the real: the universe, the earth, ourselves, and spirit. And I have been working out, that book came out, I wrote it in 1987, and it came out with Paulus Press in 1994. That was the first pass at metaphysics. And the second one that really completes my metaphysics is called The Reign of the Holy Spirit, Christ Self I Am. It is all about reincarnation. And at that point, I was a Catholic, I was a convert to Catholicism. And the book came out with Paulus Press, and they would not touch reincarnation. They told me, you can't say anything about it. And I said, well, you won't even consider the evidence? And they said, no, we're not allowed even to mention it. Well, in the years since, I've learned a great deal about Jesus and the church and the way that we're bound in by various religious ideas. And over the years, the first feeling I had was I breathe a freer air. And so I have now 4 books out laying out all my basic principles and first terms. I now have these ideas much more clearly than I did then. You can see my writings. My writings are twofold. The first is my reasons for thinking that consciousness, my arguments for the simple fact that consciousness really is the true principle of the universe and the right fundamental term. And the rest of it, of my writings, and I'm just really saying them out very simply now, is to make this term the basic term of the universe, consciousness, and see what it means for these 4 aspects of the real, the universe, the earth. And so all my works surface around that. David?
Yes, I just muted someone. Someone unmuted themselves. So just carry on.
Okay. Let me put it to you in a nutshell. We know the view that consciousness only appears at the end of evolution and only in ourselves and some of the higher animals when matter attains a certain state of complexity. But we all know that it's and in fact, the conviction is of neuroscience that consciousness is something produced by neurons in the brain. And so the great question of neuroscience is, of course, how do the neurons produce consciousness? And so far, nobody's ever been able to show how the neurons produce consciousness. And there are many very intriguing and fascinating issues showing up with consciousness that are very unsettling for the materialist view of things that we all grew up in. I would say, let me just put it in a nutshell, ever since Descartes, first of all, my taking on the modern world is that the whole of the modern world is in the grip of a false metaphysics. Most recently, it comes from Descartes, but it goes right back to the dawn of philosophy of thought, because Plato and Aristotle both believed that the earth was something devoid of consciousness. And so here is the present day version at that point in Rockefeller, that consciousness is only in ourselves and in some of the higher animals. But no one has known how, and no one has been able to show how neurons do this. It's just a kind of faith. And the other aspect of the faith, yes, consciousness is produced by neurons, but it's nothing real in itself. It's the neurons that are doing the work. Now, William James summed up this position by saying consciousness is to the brain as a shadow to the runner. It runs beside him, but never influences stride. And so that has been the thinking, but very puzzling data are showing up. And I would say, in fact, the whole faith of modern science is shaken by its total inability to solve what are now known as three distinct issues with consciousness. First of all, the fact that this whole scientific image of nature as something devoid of consciousness is driving the destruction of the earth, and it's driving us all insane, and it needs to change. The second problematic is what is now called the hard problem of consciousness. Consciousness founders on three issues. What's called the hard problem of consciousness, it cannot be solved by present paradigms. The mind-body problem, how can something like atoms and molecules produce ideas, also cannot be solved. My answer would be, how do the neurons produce consciousness? They don't. How can matter produce mind or consciousness? It can't. That's my simplest answer. And of course, the third one is the near-death experience, which is shaking the whole of the modern world. Everybody is interested in, from scientists to ordinary people. And the real question is, what does it really mean? And why are so many scientists refusing even to look at the evidence, as Paulus Press would not even look at the evidence for reincarnation, that in fact, it turns out to be the centerpiece of Jesus' teachings, banned in a 4th century council that claimed to be teaching in Jesus' name, that decided the populace could best be controlled with fear, and edited reincarnation out of all mentioned in the scriptures. We come out of, to put it bluntly, a long series of lies that started as just some theories, some good ideas, but they have hardened into a position where some people are vigorously given over to the indefensible defense of false theories, and others are moving into a new view of things. Now, revolutions happen in science when data show up that can't be accounted for by the going paradigms. And my sense is that all the anomalies now associated with consciousness are just such new data showing up. and they both point the way to a new understanding of the universe and a revolution in science itself. I would say, as you've seen from my abstract, that the data showing up around consciousness, and especially that these three problems associated with consciousness cannot be solved by present paradigms, and they therefore call science itself into question. The near-death experience I see as a crucial experiment of these times. Just as Newton's experiment with light, there was a discussion in Newton's day about whether white light was composed of colors or not. And so Newton staged a demonstration and invited many prominent scientists to come. He held up a prism and put a beam of white light through the prism, and it broke up into all the colors of the rainbow. Everybody who was there, for everyone who was there, it was decisive. But there were a great many people who were not there because they had their egos all tied up with false theories and were not about to have them refuted by the facts. And this suggests that there's a real religious strain lacing science itself. And in fact, the whole notion that that only human beings have consciousness goes right back to Genesis, and the whole notion that human beings are the only being on the planet made in the image of spirit. And as my sister, who has no interest in spiritual matters whatsoever, once put it to me, Lorna, she said, is this what it means to be made in the image of God, to destroy every other living being? Good question. Is it? I think there are some certain kind of male minds that's exactly what it means to be made in the image of some God, but it isn't the God of Jesus or the true religion that I now see coming into the world, and the tremendous hope with Biden and the political sphere that the whole political cast of thinking is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. And so very quickly, to return to Descartes, what is really deeply embedded in the modern world is Descartes' concept of matter. Descartes divided the whole of reality into two principles, mind and matter. God and human beings alone on the planet had mind, and everything else, all the bright array of beings with us, were just matter, the weighable, the extended, the measurable in space and time, utterly devoid of any inner life, of feeling, thought, or emotions. And now this concept, first of all, his classification was a boon to developing science, because it now scientists could now just happily set about weighing and measuring without having to worry about whether trees had an inner life or animals similarly. But it was a disaster for the earth, because for centuries before him, the earth had been worshipped as a goddess. At that point, almost overnight, the earth became a thing, just things, quote, commodities and resources to be bought and sold at will, to be converted into consumer items, to be converted into money in the bank. And this is the view that is driving the system itself, and it's driving the destruction of the planet. If there is a single, human beings go by ideas. If there is a single idea at the heart of our complete destruction of the earth, which is now crashing down all around us, it is the conviction that the earth is something devoid of consciousness. Now, scientists and philosophers have been trying to get rid of dualism ever since Descartes elaborated it. They have done this by trying to make matter the central term and to explain everything, and especially consciousness, in terms of matter. And we are now at a point in our history where this does not work. And in fact, I think, we are now, I would say, in the position of Copernicus. Remember Copernicus, he was working with the assumption that the Earth was the center of the universe. That the sun was the center of the universe, and everything evolved around it. That this comes from the Greek legacy of that only human beings are really important. And until his calculation got so unwieldy that he tried it all the other way around. And immediately all his data fell neatly into place. I'm saying we're in the position of Copernicus. We've tried to solve everything in terms of matter. This has not worked. It cannot work because this is a false theory, basically, of Descartes. And it is now being refuted by the facts. And it is time to try it the other way around. Let's make consciousness the basic term and see if this makes any better sense of things. And I'm claiming that it does, and that it implies a completely new universe picture, an earth picture, a picture of human identity, and a picture of spirit. That we are now in the position of Copernicus. Try the other way around. And I lay all these arguments very clearly. You can find them in my work. And at this point, I would say there's something that the realities on the earth plane are shifting rapidly. And we are at a radical moment in our own history. And it owes to the fact, first of all, the whole of the modern world is in the grip of this false theory of matter elaborated by Descartes. But the second thing is that virtually all human economies are based on the destruction of the earth. And we are now at a place in our own evolution where we can foresee, if we continue on as we are, we can foresee our own extinction. Now, there are plenty of people who think, well, it's just all about some quick technological fix. I say it isn't, that it is all about radically rethinking ourselves. Deeply embedded in the modern world is this false view of matter. And we are now really being called, human beings go by ideas, deeply embedded in what we're seeing all around us. It is as if the destruction of the planet has gone into high gear. We are seeing all around us the expression of what I now call an old civilization. We are leaving, this is where I think we are in our history. The human race is leaving behind an old civilization that was based on male dominance, fear, lies, and control. The impulse at the heart of a civilization has been that impulse. And we are moving into a new civilization with new fundamental terms and first principles based on truth and love. And that I'm not just saying we are moving into it, I would say we are in it. And it is, in fact, many women friends I talk to say, we're already in the love orientation. That is what is surfacing the darkness before us. Now, let me just talk about, even as we're meeting today, the US is trying to extricate itself from the latest hurricane, bigger than any hurricane ever, devastating the East Coast. In the last few weeks, it is as if the catalog of the horror stories now happening in the environment, ecosystems collapsing, even areas of the Arctic going into high temperature, but my sense is that my question is, how bad do things have to get before the human race will wake up? before they will realize, we're in deep trouble with the planet, and where they start listening, looking to people who can lead them and looking for the ideas, the new ideas, and the practices based on new ideas. And so the time is right, not simply for a revolution in science, but everywhere. We are a scientific age. A revolution in science from matter to consciousness, that's what I am claiming that it is a revolution everywhere. And there is not a single aspect of our lives that will not be affected by making this term consciousness the central principle and the linchpin of a whole set of new ideas about the universe and the earth. Now, right now, I need to remind you, I'm giving you reasons for help and hope. And my sense is that what we are looking at in the devastation that has now just swept up the East Coast is the fullest expression of human malpractice toward the earth. And it owes to the fact that we come out of a history and a civilization based on contempt for the earth. It begins with contempt for the earth. Down the road, it will turn into contempt for the body, for sex, for women, for the indigenous people, and for the native people and people of color, especially women of color. And that we are now at a place where this entire tradition is up for us. The whole reappearance of women in history. And so let me mention the most terrifying proposal concerning the mess that we have made of the planet is that of Lovelock. Lovelock has predicted that the human population, now at almost 8 billion, by the end of the century, will have become 500 million people living around the poles. Now, that was a few years back when the Arctic was still colder than other places. But at this point, the warming of the planet is happening everywhere. And things that were supposed to not appear until the 2070 or so are now appearing. And my sense is they're appearing now because, first of all, they can. And second of all, they have to. Our attitudes to the planet have to change, and they now can. And what we're looking in this devastating hurricane is we're looking at the planet taking the human system down. It's not even at this point some argument about this is what we need to do. This is what Naomi Klein, how capitalism and the climate are on a collision course. We all know things that have to happen, but nothing has ever happened. And now it has to. We don't have a choice. And so Biden, and the whole thing, what is so exciting to me and to everyone is the way this is playing out politically, because these changes have to take place. They require a new worldview. They require a totally new understanding of the universe and the earth and ourselves and what we're here for. And they can change. And surely, I think this is a time of a great awakening. These times are also unique. They're unique in that we have to change our ways, and we need new ideas on which to change them. One of those new ideas being that the earth is just as conscious as we are, that all of the bright array of beings who share the planet that we have taken to look down on with contempt, all of them are just as conscious as we are. And there's a wonderful book that has appeared, a study of animal populations called Beyond Words, What Animals Feel and Think. And the author ends with saying, the more we can realize how like us the animals are, the harder it will be to do them all in. And then there's another prophecy for the earth beyond that of Lovelock, all across the planet. The indigenous need, first of all, nobody understands the computer science of the planet better than Lovelock. But the native people all across the planet have another prophecy concerning these times, that these are the times of the reappearance of the feminine energy on the planet, that at December solstice, the feminine energy has been flowing into the planet for some time, and that at the December solstice, 2012, when many people expected the end of the world, because the Mayan calendar ended and everybody predicted the end of the world, the very next day the whole planet shifted into the love orientation. And their view is that at that point, the incoming energy of the feminine peaked in its rate of inflow. And from now on, the new feminine energy will shape the course of history. And by the year 2300, the human race will have attained its greatest maturity. And so a lot of issues are very rapidly coming to a head. And I mentioned the feminine issue because I had to sweat my way at St. John's as a tutor at St. John's. I had to read my way through all the horrible and nasty things the great thinkers have said about both women, the animals, and the earth. Given the fact that I had grown up so close to animals, I've never met a single animal, earthworms or cockroaches or anything else, that I did not consider in every way superior to a human being. And human beings, we have never known what we're here for. We have been all busy, oh, we're the great this, we're the great that. And the simple truth is that we have never cared for any species other than ourselves. And so we have felt quite free to do them all in. We come out of a tradition of taking ourselves, we are the lords and masters, the earth must do as we say. Well, we aren't, and the earth is making it pretty clear that we aren't the ones who are calling the shots. The earth is calling the shots. And my sense is we have never cared for any species except ourselves. We have these religious attitudes that essentially it was all made for us to do with whatever we like. And that's what we've been doing. And we are now in a mess. And the mess calls virtually all our old ideas, because everything that is now happening on the planet owes to these false theories that go right back to the dawn of thought and are now up for us to rethink ourselves through them. And so what are we looking at the earth? I am amazed, first of all, that with all of these catastrophes, so there's so little loss of human life. And my sense is the planet could easily get rid of us. And perhaps we have always taken ourselves to be the pinnacle of creation. We are, in fact, the chief parasite of the planet. And it could be that the earth has realized she harbors a parasite and has found a way with global warming to get rid of us. Now, I don't think that's what she wants. What irritates the planet about us is our terrible onslaught of destruction. We must cut the forest because we need wood to build our homes. We must tear we must destroy the animals because they're getting in the way. We must destroy the rainforest because that's the only way we can make money. We have turned the planet. Our horrible technological ways of thinking have brought us to our present impulse as the same kind of impulse that that I had at that moment of Rockefeller, where I realized if the stars that I always loved so much were simply burning lumps of matter, why get excited about them? And I think the human race has lost all sense of the mystery of life and the animals, and it's a momentous, radical moment when so many of these interrelated issues are coming to a head. And I mentioned the near-death experience. We can talk about it in a minute, what it really means, because it is the crucial experiment of this time. It refutes, first of all, let me just remind you of what it is. The patient, it has most recently been described in the mainstream literature by Pim von Lommel, and it happens in the patient, it happens often on cardiac wards. The patient body is lying on the bed, brain dead, i.e. the electroencephalogram flat, but the patient is alive and well at the ceiling, and he's looking down and watching the doctors working his body below, able to see and read dials he couldn't have seen from the bed, as I mentioned, things outside the corridor. And in a certain moment, he is, quote, revived and is able to tell the doctors all about this experience. Now, what is actually happening is there is a patient, he's hovering at the ceiling, he's able to see without eyes, he can hear without ears, and he can think and remember without a brain. There isn't a scientific principle now in place that can explain any of this, even given the fact that of seeing and hearing, which we all think is totally connected with our sense organs, even those are obviously independent of the body. And so the first thing we know about ourselves is, first of all, consciousness is completely separable from the body. Our full sense of ourself, and it seems to be much more than just that consciousness is in our brains, is separable from the body, and then all our true powers would appear to be in it. Now, first of all, that refutes pretty well all theories of of consciousness, that it is a mere byproduct of brain activity. Gilbert Ryle referred to consciousness as, quote, the ghost in the machine, that what is real is the machine and consciousness is just kind of floating around it. Well, this suggests a completely new connection, that consciousness looks like the organizing principle of the body. And if it didn't go back to the body, well, then the kind of experiences described by Moody and Kubler-Ross would appear. And that's the first thing. It seems that our true self, pure consciousness, and if it's not produced by neurons, then whatever are the neurons doing, whatever they're doing, they aren't producing consciousness. In some way, they must be carrying consciousness. To make a long story short, well, wait a minute, let me tell you some more about this. And so,
excuse me, Lorna, could you just come to a conclusion, because you've given us a huge amount to think about.
I'll say that right now.
Because we otherwise we're going to run out of time for questions, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest.
Okay, so. I'll say it very quickly. I give a new universe picture based on consciousness. This is, first of all, Penrose has called the whole of science itself into question. Pym's studies on the near-death experience appeared in 2001. Penrose published The Road to Reality, claiming that the whole of science has in fact missed the road to reality in 2004. And if those two studies go together, it suggests already that we need another version of things. And Roger concludes by saying, we have no idea even what physical reality really is. I would make my basic term consciousness and say all physical reality an expression of consciousness. There's a new universe picture based on consciousness, new causalities of love, of ideas, of intent, plan, and purpose, of what Aristotle called final causality, higher reasons for things. And this is an earth in which consciousness is everywhere and throughout, and a continuum of many forms of consciousness, of which our own is one. Ourselves, I propose that this new universe picture has a place for reincarnation as a new theory of the self. And then for spirit, it has a place for spirit as simply infinite consciousness. All universe is formed out of and for this consciousness. The native people had it right. Everything has consciousness. Every being has its own spirit and is also an expression of spirit. And the native people, the idea about spirit of the native people is the equivalent to the white man's mathematics. And in my work, I am aware, finally, that I am spelling out the native North American view of things in terms of present day science and in terms of both consciousness and present day science. And that's it.
Thank
and
you.
I go on to really work it out.
Thank you very much indeed, Lorna. I think what you've done is given us a powerful message, as well as a lucid explanation of the need for a revolution, a paradigm shift, a revolution in science. And the revolution, what I really like about what you said, is that this revolution is not just in consciousness and neuroscience departments, but actually it affects the way we treat each other and the way we treat the earth. And I think the logic of what you said in terms of matter and the earth being thought of as a thing, that pulls all this argument together so that we realize that the ecological problem and the mind-body problem are in fact the same problem or the same challenge, and because they both come from that same error that you pointed out, which is the primacy of matter and the fact that nothing else has consciousness and that we are at the top of the tree. So I think that's as I say, a powerful integrative message. And I think the question that we are probably all asking ourselves is, how do we help the revolution along? Because we, the whole work of the network and the Galileo Commission is really calling for this metaphysical revolution, this revolution in worldview. And a revolution is something that literally turns something completely around. And so the Copernican moment is now coming out of consciousness studies. And I think this is a very important diagnosis. So thank you. So we'll go into, so we've got some questions also in the, and I've just, let me know if you can't hear something, but I'll just read this question from Jeanette as the first one. If humans go by ideas, how do we understand what non-dual teachers say that we know and resonate with love and truth in awareness beyond words? How do we communicate that to the majority of people? When people feel threatened, are they likely to regress and dig into old ideas? Is there a movement of consciousness reaching out to us? I think that's the key question. There's the last piece. Is there a movement of consciousness reaching out to us?
I think the whole thing is changing, and it's changing faster than anybody thought. I know that there's this disclosure project going on, which is attracting a lot of ire. and the people who are being revealed as there has been, in fact, a lot of hidden knowledge about consciousness and what it means that has been suppressed for a very long time. And the people who are now being revealed as some of the suppressors are saying, well, so we sat on this info, so what? So I would say to them, the first of all, you probably set our human development and our getting ourselves right with the earth back for a very long time. And I would say the best thing you can do now is get on side and take this emerging knowledge of consciousness and work out the implications. What does it mean for the way we look at the earth? Two things have to happen. First, we need new ideas. And second, we need to have them put into practice at the political level. And my hope is that we can develop both of these. And the hope is already that with Biden is a new impulse. And first of all, it's a love orientation. And then it is the truth orientation. The great thing about the pandemic is it made people stop just listening to words and wanting to find out how to protect themselves, what's really happening, what's going on. We come out of a tissue of lies and of the last 4 years, and the pandemic has started everybody wanting to know what science has to say about all of this. And there's Biden. He's in the love orientation and he's in the truth orientation. What we heard what we heard in his State of the Union were all the ideas that go along with truth and that go along with love, caring for people, the truth that the people at the bottom matter, the truth that trickle-down economics does not work, the truth that we need to found better economic theories, not by rewarding the rich, some of whom don't pay any taxes whatsoever, but that realize that the whole of society is all connected. I would say, in fact, this is a lesson we have to learn about the earth, that everything on the planet is connected with every other being. And we have to design our technologies that in mind. We can't, that was what Rachel Carson was all about. We can't just target one species, it targets everything. And so already ecology is a very recent discipline. I have my hopes. We have to refound civilization. It's gone. The earth has taken the system down. We have to rebuild on new, better terms. And Biden has them, and there are brilliant thinkers at every level working these out. And I would say to everyone who's been suppressing some of the findings of what a consciousness universe is all about, get on side, work them out. We have to work them out practically. We need the new ideas and they have to be put into practice. And Biden is about both of these things, truth and love. And we're seeing it's a very radical move on his part to put money in the pockets of the poor instead of the rich. And all of a sudden, he's going to start taxing the rich. And it's a revolutionary moment already being translated politically. That's my take on
yes. Thank you very much. I'm not sure everybody will agree about Biden, especially in the health area, but we'll leave that aside because I think the whole point is just to get the essence of what you're saying here, that we do need to move in this direction of love and truth, and I would add wisdom. Roger, you have a question.
Yes, Lorna, brilliant information here, mate. I read your entire 25 pages of the document that was attached to the invitation today, and there's tremendous amounts of truth and right answers in there. And in particular, on page 24, you say, all universes, all worlds are formed out of this consciousness, divine and sacred throughout. Well, I find that to be absolutely true, and my research group actually have come up with the why the physical universe was created by us and when. And the question I have of you is, that's a big statement. Is that something that's a theoretical conclusion by you, or have you actually experienced that?
Okay, just put the last part of that again.
Yeah, it says here, all universes, all worlds are formed out of this consciousness, which we are looking at consciousness as being us, ourselves, as spiritual presences, right? And then the second part of it is it's divine and sacred throughout.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's time we go ahead.
No, I think what Roger's asking is, how did you arrive at this conclusion?
Yeah. Have you actually seen and experienced this? Because me and my team.
Well, here I am, you know, after being in academia and science and everything else.
Okay.
I began meeting with a group of women. I sent 4 works off to press in 2004 and immediately started to work with this group of women.
Mhm.
And I followed a path of inner healing most of my life. But it was in this meeting with this group of women 1 week after I sent my last work off to press, The Reign of the Holy Spirit. You know, I was a convert to Catholicism, so I know the idea that they have the God immanent and that God is lingers in creation and things like that.
Mhm.
But the whole thing has gotten so tied up with consumerism and owning things, and somehow we crossed the threshold somewhere. Mine began when I met these women, and I've been in academia with the war of words. I'm no stranger to combat, but they were such an accepting group of people that my whole body began to relax. And I would go into my room on the path of prayer I always follow, and I'd go by myself and say to the pain, okay, I'm willing to hear you, come up. And in this way, all the pain of my life came up because we store it in our bodies. And the more it came up, the more I could feel and see, I think, things that other people don't even know exist. I mean, as I'm sitting here now, I can see realms of light shifting and changing around me. I am visually impaired at this point, and I live in a world that most people don't know exists, but it's the real one. And there are 2 versions of knowing. One is every day something's added, and the other one is every day something is dropped. That's the practice of the Tao. And so I gradually began to settle into a totally new view of things. At that point, all my learning began to come up. Ideas of Plato came up, and I talked to a spiritual source I talked to and said, what's going on? And it said, you're being asked, do you want to be bound by this? If you don't want to be bound, shove it out. And that went on all the time I was meeting with the women. My body was relaxing. I let the pain of it. We are afraid of the pain because we don't welcome it. But when I'm by my room with myself, I know I'm with the Creator, and it's not a problem. And the more I threw everything else out, the more I knew what was coming. And I moved fully into what Indigenous people know about the universe. And I always have stepped out of my room with the question, what am I really looking at in these ancient trees? Well, the ancient trees, in fact, in ways human beings don't understand, maintains the entire biosphere. Human beings look out and they see board feet, a cheap source of board feet. But the whole wisdom of the planet is in the ancient trees. And it began to make such sense to me, especially all the experiences I had growing up. Somehow we have slipped into this myopic picture. I began to realize, you know, what am I looking at? I'm actually looking at an incarnation of spirit. That was my first revelation. And it came, and it came at a certain point where I was meeting with the women. And a lot of it are conversant, we know the religious ideas, but it's one thing to know that these people thought that and to actually experience it. I know there's a book called My Stroke of Insight that reveals, I think, but I can't remember what the name is.
Jill Bolt Taylor.
Yeah. Abilities began to open up that I've never known in academic life. Gregory Nixon, who first published my work in the Journal of Consciousness, no, it was the Journal of Consciousness Exploration and Research. What was I going to tell you?
Stroke of insight.
He wanted the feminine. I call it our feminine modes, and they come through our bodies. Yeah, I'm just trying to remember, because he wanted that aspect of my thought. And it gave us the kind of experiences that originally gave rise to ideas. The whole tradition has been described as it began in wonder, turned into doubt, and ended in despair with Sartre and others. And I would say that's what John of the Cross calls the dark night of the soul. And it ends with total celebration. But I know what I told them. I said, he said, how can I have experience of my dead friends? I would say in this universe is porous. But if you want to know things, you have to, quote, put your eye to the telescope. You can have connections with your dead friends, but academia is not the place to develop the abilities that will allow this. In effect, I discovered personally in these women that we have powers and abilities that we don't even suspect the existence of. Given one woman, the editor commented on that my ideas don't fit into, quote, the confines of academic philosophy. That's what I found, and suddenly everything that the Eastern traditions was making sense, everything, but it waited for first this getting in touch with my whole body and my whole sense of self. And, as I sit here, I can feel all the cells of my body I seem to have connection with. And so a lot of it, is because much of academia is published and perish, or, is wedded to the old dogmas. I would say, what can we know? That was Kant's question. We can know anything, but you have to put your eye to the telescope. You have to develop the abilities, but we have. And I would say, we're giants, but we're living like pygmies. And we've gotten hold of all of these crazy theories or ideas, and they're very confining. And the more I kicked out the ideas of the great philosophers, the more I realized how confining and controlling they really were. And I used to think I want to answer the ancient questions for myself. I now think, God, those are ridiculous questions. Where are these guys coming from? And it owes a lot to finding myself in New Mexico. I can go days without seeing a person. And I just pester going. And I say, but how's this? They say, it's this way, come in. I said, how can it be consciousness? And how can it be love and consciousness? How do these things fit together? And sometimes he'll say, I can talk to voices. Everybody on a prayer trip talks to voices. And he'll say, you get your mind out of this. You get your mind in hand and you get out of this. So, my ideas have developed that way of going out and wandering. I somehow, meeting with the women, I had all my childhood questions that I'd forgotten about. And that's how it happened.
Thanks.
And
Thanks very much.
So we don't know.
Thanks, Lorna. I think these are very important points. Tuning into the body, listening for innate wisdom. There's a specific question here from Anindita about reincarnation. Why do you accept the idea of reincarnation, and is it based on your own experience? She asks.
hang on. When I first heard about reincarnation, it was in question. It was Steiner and the Waldorf school. And it terrified me because I saw no way whatsoever, given the current picture, to make any place for it. But I began to realize that this new universe picture has a place for it. And then I began to tune into there's a lot of new age teachings that are based on reincarnation. In fact, I would say what's decisive about the whole new age version of human identity, the going version, the new age, is full of talk about reincarnation. And the first time I talked to a channel source once, and I didn't know about channeling or anything, but it's certainly a 20th century phenomenon. And we saw that, friends and I saw that, this is about 1988, saw that someone was giving a talk on it. Or there was someone who channeled, and they kind of dared me, well, go along and see what they say. And I went along thinking, good Catholic girls don't do this. But my first question to this channel source was, did Jesus teach reincarnation? And the channel source said, oh, yes, he spoke of it often. He was always speaking about reincarnation. And then I learned a lot about, Jesus got a lot of his teaching in the East. And of course, it is part of the teaching of the East. And the books I used to read when I was tired of biochemistry also mentioned it. So it's been around in my mind for a long time. And I should tell you, there were, when I started this deep path of really deep inner healing, I began to I read Seth Speaks. That was the real turning point of my life. It came my way in 1980. And it's really the foundation. And it's a very long elaboration of reincarnation, how it works, and all of this in very rational terms. And it starts with, I am writing this book, but I don't have a body. And he recounts how he completed his cycle of earthly lives. And then, so, it had been hanging around there. And I can tell you, preparing for this talk, I got into total terror. And when this happens, I know that probably some past lifetime is coming up. And sure enough, I've had lifetimes in the past that you can connect. The secret is not just remembering something, you connect with the self that you were. And at that moment, the whole thing can pass. And I've been martyred before, as many, probably everybody on the planet, has in one lifetime or another been martyred by religious authorities. And I suddenly had an image, I'm being dragged out of a prison. I understand from talking to my own guidance that I'm guided by the Lord all the time. And I was teaching then many of the ideas I'm speaking to you now. And so we have two current universe pictures that people are clinging to, or identity. First of all, evolution is how it is. Everything is born and then it dies, and that's the end of it. And then the religious isn't any better. The soul is created at conception. It lives one short lifetime, on the strength of which it is judged for all eternity to go to either heaven or the dark regions. And that's it. And they're both narrowed and tiny and totally constraining. And suddenly here is a radical new picture of human identity. These old versions of things support us in devouring the planet, basically, and trashing the planet. But this isn't what we're here for. And it's a very different picture of human identity. And it deepens the whole question because the people who know these things say, well, the animals also reincarnate. And it implies a different universe picture, because this kind of human identity is not possible on any of these other pictures.
Thanks very much, Lorna. I think we're just coming to the end now. I want to just say something about reincarnation also from the Steiner point of view, because he's got 5 volumes on reincarnation. And he sees the sort of evolutionary impulse within reincarnation, which I think is interesting. And the other thing I've been reading, which you'll see in the next issue, is Jonathan Black's book called The Secret History of the World. And if you haven't read it, then it's well worth reading. But his fundamental point, which is relevant to what we've been discussing this afternoon, or this morning if you're in the US, is that the esoteric view, from time immemorial, is a mind before matter view, not a matter before mind view. And so I think what we've been tuning into today is this intuitive, esoteric, feminine understanding of this mind, priority of consciousness, and the urgency of realizing the need for a metaphysical revolution to put a different concept, a different idea at the center of our thinking, which will revolutionize our understanding in science, our understanding of the mind-brain relationship, but also our relationship with the earth. And so I'd like to thank you very much for putting that all together into a narrative and enabling us to achieve more clarity ourselves of how all these things are connected.
The male mind has always emphasized our difference from everything else. And what I do that differs from my male thinkers that I know of is I emphasize our likeness and our kinship. And that's a major opening to a whole new view of things.
Well, that is just a wonderful note to end on. And we have Anne Baring on the call with Dream of the Cosmos, and she said this is exactly her message. And so I'm very happy to have heard a powerful articulation from the feminine principle in the context of the Galileo Commission.
So, the Earth has now taken the system down.
Thank you. Just to say to everybody, we have the Galileo Commission Summit coming up 24th, 25th of September, Beyond the Brain, 5th to the 7th of November, and lots of other interesting webinars coming up into the pipeline.
It's just been a joy to share these ideas with you, because I come from the muses of synthesis in an age of analysis. And I think the reappearance of the feminine in history, the advent of women, and the changing demographics of young people, many more people of color, everything is shifting on every level. And it's a call for a revolution on every level. The ultimate revolution is out of the whole fear orientation and into the love vibration. And
thank you so much.
Everywhere.
I couldn't agree more. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lorna. And some of you we will see in half an hour at the virtual bar, where we've got Jill Peirce talking about healing the ancestral tree or the ancestral patterns. And so I'll just have a little bit of a break before then, and look forward to seeing you all. And also we have the annual meeting coming up on
Thank you,
Monday.
David, for everything. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all.